On March 30th, 2026, hundreds of residents in Festus, Missouri, packed into a high school gymnasium and demanded that their city council reject a $6 billion AI data center that a company called CRG Clayco wanted to build on 360 acres of their community. The council voted 6-2 to approve it anyway. Days later, every single council member who had voted yes lost their re-election bid. 4 sitting elected officials removed from office in a single municipal election by residents who had never shown up to a city council meeting in their lives. The turnout was more than double the normal rate for a Festus municipal election. A resident named Erica Carter described the moment she knew the fight was on. "I became very angry," she told reporters afterward. "I had a bad feeling in the bottom of my stomach, like this man is not telling the truth about the things that he's trying to sell us on." Carter was not the only Festus resident who felt that. "The council made their bed," she said. "They had to lie in it." This story made national headlines. What got less coverage is that the same fight is happening simultaneously in Camden County at the Lake of the Ozarks, in Webster County near Springfield, in St. Charles, in Independence, and in communities across Missouri right now. The data center industry is moving into Missouri at a scale and a speed that most Missourians have not registered, and the communities where it is arriving first are learning the same things Festus learned, often after the vote has already happened. Subscribe right now, hit the button and the bell. To understand why Missouri's residents are this angry, you need to understand what a hyperscale data center actually is and what it requires from the communities it lands in. A hyperscale data center is not a server room. It is a campus, hundreds of acres of climate-controlled buildings packed with computing infrastructure, surrounded by electrical substations, cooling towers, and water infrastructure. The Festus project would have covered 360 acres. A data center in Independence planned by a Dutch company called Nebius would cover 400 acres. A proposed St. Charles data center would cover 440 acres. These are not facilities that slot into existing industrial zones without consequence. They fundamentally reshape the land around them, the infrastructure demands on the region, and the relationship between the community's resources and who has access to them. The water question is the one generating the most alarm. A single hyperscale data center consumes approximately 250 million gallons of water per year for cooling. That number comes from Christopher Lee, a partner at Foresight Strategic Advisors, who has studied data center impacts on communities. Residents in Festus and St. Charles and Camden County heard that number and asked a specific question that the companies and the local officials who supported the deals were not prepared to answer clearly. Where does that water come from, and what does it mean for what is left? In Festus, residents who opposed the deal held signs warning of environmental risks and impacts on property values. They asked who would ultimately operate the facility. The answers from city leaders were unclear on both points. "I am not against growth," a Festus resident named Lauren Albers said at the raucous March 31st meeting. "I'm against putting data centers between homes. I am against rushing into development before residents get real information, real answers, and a real voice." In St. Charles, hundreds of residents wore red shirts to an open house for a 440-acre data center project and filled the room with opposition. The company behind the project refused to identify itself. Its lawyer would only say it was a Fortune 100 company. When pressed, the lawyer offered the kind of reassurance that confirmed rather than addressed the residents' concerns. "The project will benefit the region," the lawyer said. "It's the jobs, it's the tax revenues, it's the construction jobs that are coming, it's the look towards the new economy that is going to happen, whether folks want it or not." That phrase appears in the public record because a lawyer said it in a room full of residents who very clearly did not want it. And nobody on the company side apparently thought about how it would land. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. The Ozarks connection is not speculative. It arrived weeks before this video was made, in Camden County, home of the Lake of the Ozarks, directly above the Ozark Aquifer that this channel has been documenting as a system under increasing pressure. hundreds of residents showed up to a county commission meeting in May 2026 to oppose an opportunity zone designation that would have created tax incentives for a data center development. The Camden County Commission voted no. The residents who packed that meeting understood something specific. The Lake of the Ozarks sits above the same Ozark aquifer that southwest Missouri communities are already calling insufficient for projected growth through 2060. Adding a facility that consumes 250 million gallons of water per year to a watershed above a stressed aquifer is not an abstract concern. It is a direct threat to the water supply of communities that have spent years being told the aquifer cannot sustain the demand already being placed on it. The data center industry is moving toward Missouri for documented reasons. Land is cheap compared to coastal markets. Power is available. The opposition has been unorganized, until it wasn't. Rural Missouri was described in industry publications earlier this year as a new battleground for data center development, specifically because the land is inexpensive and there is no organized opposition yet. Festus and Camden County and St. Charles have answered that characterization. The opposition organized. The opposition showed up. In Festus, the opposition then showed up to the polls and removed the people who ignored them. What the Festus election represents: 4 city council members losing their seats in a single municipal vote over a single development decision, is something that the data center industry and the local officials who court it have not fully accounted for. The Festus candidates who survived were the 2 who voted no. The ones who voted yes are no longer in office. The day after the election, Festus canceled its next council meeting. The $6 billion project whose approval caused the revolt is now navigating a city government that has been functionally reshaped by the people who opposed it. The broader pattern across Missouri is a population that has been watching land and resources change hands without adequate information, without adequate community process, and without adequate accountability. And that has started to understand the connection between those specific transactions and the specific quality of life consequences that follow. The farmland buyout story, the foreign ownership tracking gaps, the aquifer depletion, the hospital closures, the data center water consumption. These are not separate stories. They are the same story about who controls the land and the water and the infrastructure of rural Missouri, told in different chapters, arriving in different communities at different speeds. Festus voted out its city council. Camden County's commission listened to its residents and voted no. Webster County requested a moratorium. St. Charles pushed back publicly against a company that would not even tell them its name. The Ozarks has been watching this pattern arrive for years. The data centers are the newest version of it. The newest outside interest with access to resources the community has not been asked to budget, arriving with promises about economic benefit, approved, through local processes that moved faster than the community could organize a response, drawing on water and land and infrastructure that the people above it depend on, without being asked whether the terms of the arrangement work for them. Festus showed that the terms can be renegotiated, at the ballot box, after the fact. It is more expensive and more disruptive than getting the information before the vote. But it is available, and it works. There is one more dimension to this story that the local news coverage of Festus and St. Charles and Camden County has not fully assembled. The data center industry is not making arbitrary location decisions. The companies arriving in Missouri, the Fortune 100 company that would not give its name in St. Charles, the Dutch company Nebius in Independence, CRG Clayco in Festus, are following a specific logic that includes the water. Hyperscale data centers are moving away from coastal markets and into the interior of the country for several documented reasons: land cost, power availability, regulatory environment, and water. The Ozark Aquifer System beneath Missouri is one of the most significant freshwater reserves in the interior of the United States. Data centers that need 250 million gallons of water per year are locating in areas where that water is available, either from surface water sources or from groundwater systems like the Ozark Aquifer. The same aquifer that Southwest Missouri water planners have already determined cannot sustain the region's projected growth through 2060 without developing alternative sources is the same aquifer that sits beneath the communities being approached for data center approvals. Camden County's residents who showed up to that commission meeting understood this. They did not need a policy briefing to connect the dots between the data center industry's water requirements and the aquifer their communities depend on. They connected them because they live above the aquifer. They drink from it. They know what it means when someone arrives with a proposal that requires 250 million gallons per year from a system that their water managers have already told them is under stress. The transparency problem compounds the resource problem. In St. Charles, a Fortune 100 company asked for community approval of a 440-acre facility without disclosing who it was. That is not an unusual negotiating posture in the data center industry. Companies routinely structure their site acquisitions and approval processes through legal entities that do not reveal the ultimate operator to avoid competitive intelligence leaks. The practical effect for the community is that they are being asked to vote on permanent land use changes, long-term infrastructure commitments, and resource allocation decisions for a facility whose ultimate operator, water consumption specifics, and long-term plans are not disclosed before the vote. This is the same transparency problem this channel has documented in foreign land ownership, in the corporate farmland acquisition process, and in the private hunting preserve lockouts. The legal mechanism is different. The outcome for the community is the same. A significant decision about their land and their resources made before they have the information that would allow them to evaluate it. The difference in the data center fights is that the decisions are being made in public meetings with documented votes by elected officials who face the voters in a subsequent election. The land acquisition decisions documented in previous videos on this channel were made through private transactions that left no democratic accountability mechanism in place. Festus residents could vote out the council members who approved the data center. Ozarkers who watched their farmland sell to foreign-linked entities through Delaware LLCs had no equivalent remedy. That asymmetry between the decisions made in public processes that communities can challenge through elections and the decisions made in private transactions that communities cannot is the broader map of what is happening to Missouri's land and water. The data center fights are the version that generated national news because they had a dramatic outcome. A city council ousted by its own voters in a single election. The farmland and the aquifer stories did not generate that outcome because there was no vote to reverse. There was only a deed recorded in a county assessor's office and a federal disclosure that did not match the county record. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Have you heard about data center proposals near you? Because the industry publication that called rural Missouri a target specifically because there was no organized opposition yet has now seen what organized opposition looks like in Missouri. It looked like 4 empty seats on the Festus City Council. Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.